Hello everyone, this is Ep.3, and welcome back to another episode of Fire Emblem Heroes. In this episode of the Damage Calc series, we'll be taking a look at some ways to mess around with the weapon triangle. And so unfortunately, because of this amount of stuff I'm going to cover in this video, it's probably going to be more than 10 minutes. But hopefully not too much over 10 minutes, so let's get started here with Triangle Adept, also known as TA. So, this skill compounds the effects of the weapon triangle. So for Performing Arts Azura here, being a green unit, against blue units, normally she would have a 20% bonus to her attack because of the weapon triangle. But thanks to Triangle Adept, she gets an extra 20% bonus. So overall, she has a 40% bonus to her attack against blue units. But similarly, against red units, normally she would have a 20% penalty to her attack, but because of Triangle Adept, it compounds that penalty, so it becomes a 40% penalty. So against red units, she only has 60% of her attack stat against them, which is not great. And of course, on a side note, that also means the red unit has a 40% bonus to their attack when they're fighting Performing Arts Azura here. Now of course, there's some other forms of Triangle Adept in the game. Some of the common ones are the generic gem weapons. We refer to them that way because they're named after some gems. And so we have Ruby Sword here, Emerald Axe, and Sapphire Lance. And this is not an exhaustive list. There's other weapons in the game that have Triangle Adept 3 built into them. And while we're talking about that, I might as well point out that there's Triangle Adept 1 and 2. You're not likely to see 1, you might see 2 for people who are going super budget, but for example here, in the case of Triangle Adept 2, Performing Arts Azura here would have a 35% boost to her attack against blue units, and then likewise a 35% penalty to her attack against red units, because 20 plus 15, that's the logic behind that. But of course, there's a way to counter Triangle Adept and similar skills, and that is through the skill Cancel Affinity. So unfortunately, because I'm not fully invested into the series, I am not going to be showing how Cancel Affinity actually works in the game, because I don't want to spend 20,000 feathers. But I'll briefly explain Cancel Affinity 3 here. I might, in a footnote video to this episode, talk about the other interactions of like Cancel Affinity 1 and 2, but just to keep it brief here, Cancel Affinity 3, as it says, reverses the weapon triangle advantage granted by foe skills if this unit here has weapon triangle disadvantage. So here I have a green unit here, Performing Arts Azura, with Triangle Adept against Matilda here. So like I said earlier, in this case, without Cancel Affinity 3, Azura would have a 40% bonus to her attack against Matilda, while Matilda would have a 40% penalty to her attack against Performing Arts Azura. Now, if you equip Cancel Affinity 3, that 40% bonus becomes a 0% bonus for Performing Arts Azura, and likewise for Matilda. Overall, it would just be a much nicer matchup. And this is because Cancel Affinity reverses the effects of Triangle Adept here. So instead of boosting Performing Arts Azura's attack by 20%, it actually reduces it by 20%. So you take the 20% base bonus from the weapon triangle inherent to the game, and now you have the minus 20% thanks to the reverse effects of Triangle Adept 3, and now Azura has a completely neutral matchup against Matilda, a 0% bonus to her attack. So if you recall from last episode, this is how colorless units can deal with Raven Tome units that are running Triangle Adept. If you run Cancel Affinity on the colorless unit, that gives them a neutral matchup against those Raven Tome users running Triangle Adepts. It's not as common nowadays, but it's still a thing out there, so it's good to know. And while we're talking about that, I might as well talk about some things that you can't do. So the weapon triangle effects are capped at 40%. So this means if you were to run, say, Emerald Axe here with Triangle Adept, you would still only get a 40% bonus to your attack when you have weapon triangle advantage, and then similarly a 40% penalty to your attack when you're at a weapon triangle disadvantage. It doesn't go up to 60% or 50% or whatnot. It caps out at 40%. But of course it can compound to a degree, so it's like if you can have weird things go on where you have someone running like Triangle Adept 1 and someone's running Cancel Affinity 3, then you would have the base 20% from the inherent weapon triangle, and then you would reverse the 10% bonus to be a 10% penalty. So overall, if say Azura here was running TA1 versus Cancel Affinity 3 here on Matilda, have only a 10% bonus to her attack stat. So that's a thing. And for the people that like to meme, if you run Triangle Adept and Cancel Affinity on the same unit, it's like they're not running an A or B skill. It does absolutely nothing because they negate each other. So that's the thing that you should probably know as well. The one more skill I wanted to bring up here, since we're talking about ways to mess with the weapon triangle. I unfortunately don't have Maribel, so I can't showcase this myself, but Tactics Drills allows me to showcase Trilemma here. And so this weapon can inflict the Triangle Adept status, TA3 status on foes. So here you can see Frederick is doing 29 damage to this Lance Dragon. But if we attack this Lance Dragon here, you can see that these 3 units here get this little icon in the bottom right corner. It looks like a Triangle Adept icon, and that's because they have the Triangle Adept effect. So now, against this Lance Dragon, Frederick has a 40% bonus to his attack. And so you can see he's doing a bit more damage compared to the 29 from earlier because he has an extra 20% bonus to his attack. And while we're talking about Cancel Affinity a bit earlier, if this Frederick here were to run Cancel Affinity 3, then against the Sword Fighter he would have a neutral matchup, so he wouldn't have a 40% penalty to his attack. It would just be a neutral matchup. And on the Sword Fighter side, he would also have a 0% bonus to his attack against Frederick if he was running Cancel Affinity 3. So that's an interesting interaction that you can do to fool around. It's not as common nowadays, for sure. It's definitely a gimmick at best, but it is something you can do in the game, and I thought I'd briefly mention in this episode. So to wrap things up for this episode, I figured I might as well do something similar to the last episode, showing that the weapon triangle is not completely a complete determiner, I guess if you want to say it that way, of what units can beat what units can be beaten. What am I trying to say? What units can beat other units? I hope you understood that. But here we have a Winter Ephraim here, a blue unit. We have our green unit here in Performing Arts Azura. So surely with Triangle Adept, we should be able to handle this matchup, right? Because we have a 40% bonus to our attack, so we can definitely kill here. Actually, we don't kill. Awkward. And so, this is just showing that even if you get a whopping 40% bonus to your attack, it doesn't mean you're murdering units even when you have the weapon triangle advantage. You still need a decent attack stat to use off of. So, because it definitely scales up the higher your attack stat is. But if we can't one round KO him here, during player phase, we can surely bait him. You know, he has a 40% penalty to his attack. What could possibly go wrong? And so here, it doesn't even matter here in this case. Even if he had his special, didn't have his special there, he still would have 1 round KO'd Performing Arts Azura there. And that's just showing that, again, just because you have Triangle Adept on a unit or Weapon Triangle advantage doesn't mean you're going to win the matchup all the time. You definitely sometimes have to do your calculations, and that's kind of why the series is around, so you can learn how to do that. But anyways, with that in mind, in the next episode, we're going to take a look at the effective modifier to attack. So things like bows versus flying units, and armor slaying weapons against armors, dragon slaying weapons against dragons, you name it. So we'll be taking a look at that next episode. Might be a 2-parter because there's definitely a lot to cover. But until then, thanks for watching. As always, this is Ether Dragon, and hope to see you all next time. Bye.